Imagine standing in the shadow of thousands of life-sized soldiers, each with a unique face, each holding weapons that once gleamed under the Chinese sun. For decades, we've been told these terracotta warriors were built to protect China's first emperor in the afterlife, a magnificent but straightforward funerary guard. But what if that story, as dramatic as it seems, is only scratching the surface? What if the true purpose of this ancient army was something far more mysterious, something that rewrites not just Chinese history, but our understanding of human ambition itself? Today, we're diving into one of archaeology's most captivating enigmas. We'll explore theories that challenge everything we thought we knew, theories suggesting these warriors were part of a grand cosmic ritual, a symbolic army meant not for protection but for transformation. Some researchers now believe Emperor Qin Shi Huang's Terracotta Legion was designed to accomplish something much bigger than guarding a tomb. They were meant to help him conquer death itself, to achieve immortality in ways that blur the line between history and mythology. This isn't just a story about clay and bronze. It's a journey into the mind of a ruler who unified China, standardized its writing and currency, and then embarked on a quest that seems almost supernatural. We'll uncover hidden patterns in the army's arrangement, decode ancient texts that hint at a deeper purpose, and walk through the silent ranks of soldiers as if they hold secrets waiting to be rediscovered. If you've ever wondered about the limits of human ambition, or how legends are born from truths we've yet to fully understand, you're in the right place. By the end of this video, you won't look at these ancient figures the same way again. To understand why this theory is so radical, we first need to grasp the official story that has been told for decades. It begins with the formidable Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the man who first unified China under a single imperial rule. In life, he commanded a powerful, real army that crushed rival states and forged an empire. It was believed that in death he would need that same protection. According to the traditional narrative, the emperor, consumed with a fear of the afterlife and vengeful spirits, ordered the creation of a subterranean terracotta army to safeguard his eternal reign. This colossal project began around 210 BCE, just before his death, a frantic effort to complete his final resting place. The sheer scale of the mausoleum complex is staggering, a city for the dead mirroring his capital, Xianyang. The terracotta warriors are just one part of this vast necropolis. They were stationed in battle formation, facing east, the direction from which his conquered enemies had come. Each soldier was unique, armed with real bronze weapons, swords, spears, and crossbows, suggesting they were ready for actual combat in the spiritual realm. This fits perfectly with known ancient Chinese burial practices. For centuries, the nobility had been buried with ritual objects and sacrificial victims to serve them in the next world. Emperor Qin was simply taking this concept to its most logical and most extravagant extreme. He replaced the human sacrifices of old with clay facsimiles, an act that could even be seen as merciful, yet the intention remained the same: to project his immense earthly power directly into the afterlife. This explanation is clean, logical, and sits comfortably within our understanding of history. It tells us that a powerful man wanted to stay powerful forever, and he used the resources of an entire empire to make that wish a reality. But what if this clear-cut story is only what we were meant to see on the surface, but the official story begins to fray at the edges when we look at the army's actual deployment? If these warriors were truly a funerary guard, their first and most important duty would be to protect the emperor's tomb. So why are they positioned so far away from it? The main mound containing the emperor's burial chamber stands nearly a mile to the west of the Terracotta Army pits. This isn't a subtle distance, it's a significant gap that creates a major strategic problem. In any defensive scenario, you want your most vital assets protected at the core, with your defenders forming a tight perimeter around them. Instead, we find the emperor's hypothetical guardians isolated, stationed far out in front of what they're supposed to be guarding. It's as if a king, fearing an assault on his castle, decided to station his entire army in a field a mile away, leaving the castle gates utterly exposed. Their formation adds another layer of mystery. The soldiers are arranged in classic battle order, but they are all facing east. This makes perfect historical sense from the perspective of Qin Shi Huang's life, as his most powerful conquered enemies, the states of Chu, Yan, Kai, and Zhao, were all to the east. Yet, from a tomb defense perspective, this single-direction focus is a catastrophic tactical error. It assumes any and all threats will only ever come from that one direction, leaving the tomb's flanks and rear completely vulnerable. In the spiritual world he supposedly feared, wouldn't vengeful spirits or other supernatural adversaries be able to approach from the north, south, or west? The arrangement feels less like a practical defense plan and more like a symbolic reenactment of a past victory, a permanent memorial to his earthly conquests rather than a functional guard for his eternal rest. Furthermore, the army itself is not one unified force surrounding the tomb, but is instead divided into separate, self-contained pits. Pit 1 contains the main infantry and chariot force. Pit 2 holds a more complex mix of cavalry, archers, and additional chariots, and Pit 3 is a much smaller command post with high-ranking officers. They are laid out like a real army on campaign, but they are not in a position to mutually support one another or fall back to defend the tomb mound. Their entire posture is offensive, not defensive. They look prepared to march forward and meet an enemy head-on, not to dig in and protect a static position behind them. This strategic disconnect is the first major crack in the traditional narrative, suggesting that the Terracotta Army's purpose was far more complex than simple protection. They seem frozen in a moment of purposeful action, but the question remains, what action and for what ultimate goal? This strategic misplacement is only the beginning. To truly judge the army's purpose, we need to look at its composition, to see what's actually present in these pits and, perhaps more tellingly, what is conspicuously absent. A real imperial guard, especially one tasked with defending an emperor for all eternity against unknown supernatural threats, would be a self-sufficient, fully integrated fighting force. It would have all the necessary components to wage a sustained defense. Yet, when we inventory the Terracotta Army, we find glaring omissions that defy this logic. Consider the cavalry. While we do see terracotta horses and riders in Pit 2, their presence is limited and their support structure is non-existent. A functional cavalry unit requires far more than just men and horses. Where are the grooms, the stable hands, the veterinarians, or the blacksmiths needed to care for the animals and maintain their equipment? In a real military encampment, these support roles would be everywhere, vital to keeping the cavalry operational. Their complete absence suggests these cavalrymen were never intended to actually move, fight, or be sustained. They are frozen in a single moment, a symbolic representation of cavalry power rather than a practical one. Even more critical is the lack of a proper command and control infrastructure. Pit 3 is often called the command post, and it does contain high-ranking officers, but it is tiny compared to the massive infantry force in Pit 1, containing only 68 figures and a single chariot. For an army of thousands, this is a shockingly small command element. Where are the staff officers, the messengers, the signalmen, and the strategists? A genuine headquarters for a force of this size would be a bustling hub of activity, not a quiet, small assembly of high-status figures. This setup feels more ceremonial than functional, like a group of generals posed for a portrait rather than actively directing a campaign. Perhaps the most damning evidence against the protective guard theory is the total absence of any medical corps. In any army, ancient or modern, medical support is not a luxury. It is an absolute necessity for maintaining fighting strength. The terracotta warriors are equipped with real, functional weapons, implying the expectation of real combat and real casualties. So where are the field hospitals? Where are the surgeons, the physicians, the nurses, or even the basic medical supplies? Their omission is illogical if this was meant to be a functioning army engaged in perpetual battle. It implies that wounds, recovery, and the maintenance of troops were never considerations in the design. The soldiers were created perfect and were meant to remain that way, untouched by the wear and tear of actual warfare. They are pristine, eternal symbols, not soldiers preparing for a long, hard fight. When you assemble all these missing pieces, the support staff, the full command structure, the medical units, the image of a practical defensive force completely falls apart. What we are left with is not a military garrison but a grand-scale tableau, a snapshot of imperial power captured in clay. It is an army designed to be looked at and to symbolize something, not to actually perform the gritty, messy work of fighting. This realization forces us to ask a much more profound question. If this incredible project wasn't about building a practical guard, what was its true, intended function? The answer may lie not in the art of war, but in the emperor's obsessive pursuit of something far more elusive. This brings us to the first compelling alternative theory, that the Terracotta Army was never a functional guard, but a colossal symbol of imperial power. Think of it not as a military unit, but as the ultimate piece of political propaganda, carved in clay and buried for eternity. Emperor Qin Shi Huang didn't just unite China through sheer force, he did it through a revolutionary consolidation of power. He standardized everything: weights, measures, the written script, even the axle widths of carts. His reign was about imposing a single, unified order upon a vast and previously fractured collection of warring states. The Terracotta Army can be seen as the final, permanent expression of that order. Its primary audience may not have been the spirits of the underworld, but the living people of Qin China. The construction of the mausoleum was an open secret, a project that required the labor of hundreds of thousands of artisans and workers over nearly 4 decades. The message this sent was unmistakable. It demonstrated that the emperor's power was so absolute, so limitless, that he could command an entire nation to build a perfect, silent army whose only purpose was to reflect his glory. The sheer, incomprehensible scale of the project was the point. It was designed to awe his subjects and utterly crush the spirit of any potential rivals, proving that resistance was not just futile but unimaginable. The incredible detail of each figure deepens this symbolic reading. This wasn't a hurried job, it was a meticulous project where every soldier received individual attention. Each face is unique, representing the diverse ethnicities and regions that were now part of a unified China. They are not generic clay dolls, they are a microcosm of the empire itself, forever standing in formation under the emperor's banner. This sends a powerful message of integration and control. In life, he commanded a real army drawn from these different peoples. In this eternal monument, he forever commands their likenesses, a metaphor for his everlasting dominion over every corner of his realm. Furthermore, the army's posture is one of pristine, perfect readiness. They are not shown battle-worn or weary. They are ideal soldiers at the peak of discipline and power. This isn't a depiction of war, but of the idealized threat of war. It's a permanent display of military might, frozen in time to communicate an endless capacity for force. The message is clear: the emperor's power is eternal, his army is forever ready, and his authority is as unyielding as the terracotta from which they are made. This transforms the entire complex from a tomb into a timeless monument to the Qin state, ensuring that his legacy of absolute power would never fade, even if his dynasty itself did not last. This symbolic interpretation is powerful, but it still operates within a worldly framework of politics and power. To uncover a purpose that truly matches the scale of Qin Shi Huang's ambition, we must venture into the realm of the spiritual. The emperor was famously, perhaps obsessively, consumed with a single goal: achieving immortality. He dispatched expeditions across the seas to find mythical elixirs of life and consulted with alchemists and sorcerers, all in a desperate bid to cheat death. Given this context, the Terracotta Army takes on a radically different meaning. What if these figures were not meant to symbolize power for the living, but to actually wield it for the dead? What if they were not physical protectors, but spiritual conquerors? This theory posits that the army's true battlefield was not the earth around the tomb, but the uncharted territories of the afterlife. In ancient Chinese cosmology, the world after death was not a single peaceful realm, but a complex, layered universe populated by spirits, deities, and potential adversaries. A soul's journey through this landscape was perilous. Emperor Qin, who commanded the known world, would not have intended to simply arrive in the afterlife as a supplicant. He would have planned to arrive as a conqueror, and his Terracotta Legion was the vanguard force for this metaphysical invasion. Their eastward-facing formation suddenly makes a different kind of sense. In many ancient beliefs, the East is not just a geographical direction, but a spiritual one. It is the direction of the rising sun, of rebirth and renewal. But it can also be the source of malevolent forces or the dwelling place of hostile spirits. By positioning his entire army to face east, Qin Shi Huang may have been orchestrating a perpetual spiritual offensive, a permanent campaign to subjugate the mystical realms from which the greatest threats or the greatest secrets to immortality were believed to originate. They weren't waiting to defend, they were poised to invade and annex new territories in the cosmos on his behalf. The materials used in their construction add a fascinating layer to this idea. The clay itself, earth and water fused by fire, held profound symbolic significance. In Taoist alchemical traditions which were developing during this period, the human body was seen as a vessel that could be refined and perfected through ritual and meditation, transforming base physical matter into an immortal spirit body. The meticulous creation of thousands of clay soldiers, each one an individual vessel, could be seen as a massive alchemical ritual. The army becomes a single, colossal entity, a perfected form made from the primal elements, designed to operate on a spiritual frequency that the emperor's mortal body could not. This also explains the puzzling omissions we noted earlier. A metaphysical army doesn't need field kitchens or hospitals. It doesn't require a massive command structure because its orders are not given in the moment. They are imprinted upon its very creation through ritual. Their purpose is not to fight a war of attrition, but to achieve a single, decisive spiritual victory, to clear a path, subdue demonic forces, and establish Qin Shi Huang's sovereignty in the heavens just as he had on earth. They are less like soldiers and more like a permanent, active prayer, an infinite ritual enacted in clay and bronze. Their very existence a continuous act of cosmic conquest designed to secure for their emperor the ultimate prize that had eluded him in life. This idea of a spiritual conquest leads us to the third and perhaps most comprehensive theory, one that suggests the Terracotta Army was just the most visible part of a much grander design. Think beyond a single army and imagine an entire imperial government, perfectly recreated to serve the emperor for all eternity. This theory proposes that the warriors were not an isolated force, but the military wing of a complete, functioning bureaucracy buried alongside Qin Shi Huang, a duplicate administration meant to rule the afterlife just as efficiently as he ruled the living world. We get powerful hints of this from the historical text, the records of the Grand Historian by Sima Qian. He describes the emperor's tomb complex in astonishing detail, mentioning not just soldiers but models of palaces, towers, and even waterways filled with mercury to simulate the great rivers of China. Officials were said to be represented there, along with rare utensils and precious stones. This wasn't merely a tomb filled with treasure, it was a scaled-down replica of his entire empire and the apparatus that controlled it. The Terracotta Army, then, fits into this picture as the essential enforcement arm of that government. An emperor cannot rule without the ability to project power, and what is a government without its military? When we look at the army's composition through this lens, the pieces start to fall into a perfectly logical order. The different pits are no longer a tactical error but a precise organizational chart. Pit 3, the high command post with its elite officers, isn't undermanned. It is the very top of the military hierarchy, the general staff that would receive orders directly from the emperor's celestial court. Pit 2, with its mix of cavalry, chariots, and archers, represents the specialized, mobile branches of the military, the strategic reserve and rapid response force for this underworld kingdom. And Pit 1, the vast infantry force, is the core of the imperial army, the main body of troops ready to carry out the administration's decrees across the spiritual realm. This interpretation also elegantly explains the missing elements that made no sense for a standalone army. They weren't missing at all, they were just stationed elsewhere in the vast necropolis, in pits yet to be fully excavated or perhaps lost to time. The grooms and blacksmiths for the cavalry would have their own workshops. The medical corps would be located near a designated hospital area. The vast number of lower-ranking clerks, scribes, and supply officers necessary to run any large military operation would be part of the wider bureaucratic model. The army we see is not incomplete. It is simply one department in a massive, subterranean civil service, frozen in time and waiting for its emperor's command. This changes the entire purpose of the figures from symbolic guards or spiritual conquerors into functional civil servants. Their weapons were real not because they were expected to see combat, but because their roles required them. A judge in a court is given a gavel, a scribe is given a brush, a soldier in an eternal administration is given a sword. It is the tool of his office. Their unique faces further support this, representing the countless individuals who actually made the Qin government run. The soldiers from the plains, the officers from the highlands, the charioteers from the central provinces. Each terracotta figure becomes a permanent, unchanging civil servant, an immortal part of the bureaucracy that Qin Shi Huang believed would allow him to extend his rigid, legalist rule beyond the grave, governing the afterlife with the same absolute control and terrifying efficiency that he wielded on Earth. While the idea of a subterranean government is compelling, it still operates on the assumption that the emperor planned to rule a kingdom in a traditional sense after death. But what if his ambition was even grander? What if he sought to transcend death entirely, not by ruling an afterlife, but by bypassing it completely? This brings us to the most mystical and personally revealing theory of all, that the Terracotta Army was the centerpiece of a colossal alchemical immortality project, a final, desperate gamble to achieve what his mortal body could not. To understand this, we need to step into the mind of Qin Shi Huang in his final years. This was a man who had conquered everything the known world could offer. He had unified China, subdued all his enemies, and wielded absolute power. Yet he was tormented by one inevitable truth he could not control: his own mortality. Historical accounts describe a ruler increasingly obsessed with finding the secret to eternal life. He sent emissaries on perilous journeys across the eastern seas in search of mythical Pinglai Mountain, the home of the immortals, hoping to retrieve a magical elixir. He surrounded himself with fangshi, mystic magicians and alchemists who promised they could concoct potions of longevity using cinnabar, mercury, and other rare elements. He was so fearful of death that the very word death was allegedly forbidden to be spoken in his presence. Within this context of deep, personal obsession, the Terracotta Army transforms from a military or bureaucratic project into something far more profound: the largest alchemical ritual ever conceived. Alchemy in ancient China wasn't just primitive chemistry, it was a spiritual science based on the principle of transformation. The goal was to refine base materials into perfected, purified forms, and this process was a metaphor for the human spirit refining itself to achieve immortality. The alchemist sought to create an external elixir to drink, but also to catalyze an internal transformation. Now apply that principle to the army. Think of the process of their creation. They began as base, formless earth, clay, and mud from the ground. Through the skilled hands of artisans and the transformative power of fire in the kilns, this common earth was purified and perfected into permanent, unchanging human forms. They were not born and could not die. They were created in a state of perfect, suspended animation. This act of creation mirrors the alchemical process exactly, taking a primal, chaotic substance and through ritualized craft, transforming it into an eternal, perfected state. The soldiers themselves can be seen as more than symbols. They are literal vessels. In many spiritual traditions, a vessel is not just a container but a tool for transformation. Each terracotta warrior, with its unique face, could be interpreted as an individual vessel designed to capture and hold a specific spiritual essence or energy. Together, thousands of these vessels, arranged in a precise, powerful formation, might have been intended to create a massive energy field or spiritual battery. Their purpose wouldn't be to fight, but to generate and focus a specific type of power, a power meant to fuel the Emperor's transition from mortal to immortal. This theory provides a chillingly logical explanation for their strategic placement, far from the tomb mound. If this was a ritual, the army wasn't guarding the tomb, it was performing a function. Their eastward orientation takes on a new, potent significance. In alchemical and Taoist traditions, the East is associated with the wood element, with springtime, and with birth. By facing this direction of renewal, the army could have been designed to harness the pure, generative energy of the rising sun, drawing it in to feed the ritual and assist the emperor's rebirth. The most startling connection lies in the tomb itself. Sima Qian's records describe rivers and seas of mercury within the burial chamber, a claim that modern scientific surveys of the mound have supported, finding unusually high concentrations of mercury in the soil. Mercury, known as quicksilver, was the most sacred substance in Chinese alchemy. It was believed to be the key ingredient for crafting the elixir of life. But it was also deadly. The emperor, in his quest, may have been poisoned by the very substances he believed would save him. Imagine the entire complex not as a tomb, but as a massive alchemical engine. The underground mercury rivers represent the primal, flowing energy of the elixir. The Terracotta Army, perfected through fire and earth, acts as a stabilizing matrix or a focusing lens for that energy. Their silent, eternal vigil was not one of protection, but of constant spiritual operation. They were eternal servants, not in a bureaucratic sense, but in a metaphysical one. Their very existence a continuous ritual aimed at transforming the emperor's essence, refining his spirit in the same way fire refined clay until he achieved the ultimate alchemical goal, the transition from a mortal body to an immortal, golden one, forever preserved, just like his ceramic army. Yet for all its symbolic and spiritual grandeur, the project may have had a brutally practical, immediate goal that was aimed not at the spirits of the next world, but at the living, breathing subjects of this one. The fifth theory suggests the Terracotta Army was the ultimate instrument of psychological warfare, a chilling message carved in clay intended to crush the spirit of rebellion at the very moment the empire was at its most vulnerable, the death of its seemingly invincible emperor. Qin Shi Huang's reign was built on a foundation of absolute control, but it was a control maintained through fear and immense force. He had brutally unified 7 warring states, but the old loyalties, grudges, and desires for independence did not simply vanish. They simmered just beneath the surface of the new Qin order. The emperor himself was the linchpin holding this fragile empire together. He was the singular, terrifying figure who had imposed his will on millions. His death, therefore, was not just a personal tragedy but a looming national catastrophe. His court and his heir, the weak Qin Shi, would have been acutely aware that the moment the emperor passed, the entire fragile structure of the empire could shatter into a million rebellious pieces. In this light, the Terracotta Army takes on a new, more sinister purpose. Its construction was an open secret, a project that employed a vast swath of the population. Think of the message this sent. For nearly 40 years, people from every corner of the empire would have seen the raw materials going in, the artisans at work, and perhaps even heard whispers of the scale of what was being built underground. This was not a hidden project. It was a very public display of the emperor's limitless resources and unwavering will. It communicated that even in preparing for his death, his power was so absolute that he could command the creation of an entire eternal army. This was a profound psychological operation designed to instill a sense of hopelessness in any potential rebel. How could you possibly hope to overthrow a state that possesses such unimaginable power and wealth? The army's permanent offensive posture, facing east toward the conquered states, becomes a timeless threat. It was a message to the people of Chu, of Kai, of Han: your defeat is not temporary. It is eternal. Our vigilance will never end. Even after our emperor has departed, his army remains forever watching, forever ready to march. This transforms the complex from a tomb into a permanent military garrison, a promise that the emperor's iron fist would continue to grip the empire long after he was gone. The knowledge that this silent, perfect army existed just underground would have been a terrifying deterrent, a monument to state power that reminded every living person that rebellion was not just futile, but that the very might of the Qin state was now a permanent feature of the world, as unchangeable as the earth itself. This theory powerfully explains the timing of the project's frantic final stages. Most of the work was likely completed in the last few years of the emperor's life, and immediately after his death, a period of immense political uncertainty. Rushing to finish the army wasn't just about fulfilling a burial wish, it was a critical act of state security, presenting a completed, overwhelming force, even an underground, symbolic one, was a vital strategy to maintain stability during the precarious transition of power. The terracotta warriors were the ultimate bluff, a poker face carved in clay meant to convince a restive population that the state was as strong and eternal as ever, even as its founder lay dead and its leadership grew weak. In the end, the bluff-failed rebellions broke out almost immediately, but the intention behind it reveals a chillingly pragmatic calculation behind one of history's most mystical wonders. Walking among the ranks of the Terracotta Army, one of the first and most profound things that strikes you is the faces. After the initial awe of their sheer numbers fades, your eyes begin to focus on the individuals. It's a sea of unique humanity, a collection of thousands of distinct visages, each with its own character and story. You see broad, flat faces with high cheekbones, suggestive of the northern plains. You encounter narrower, more angular features that might hail from the southern coastal regions. Some soldiers have delicate, almost scholarly expressions, while others bear the grim, hardened scowls of veteran campaigners. This isn't an assembly line of identical dolls. It is a breathtakingly detailed portrait gallery of an entire empire frozen in time. The immediate and obvious question is how this was even possible. The logistics are staggering. Creating just one of these life-sized figures was an immense undertaking involving sculpting, firing, and finishing. To do it thousands of times and to ensure no two faces were exactly alike suggests a level of artistic management and coordination that seems almost superhuman for the 3rd century BC. The prevailing theory is that artisans worked in a production line system. Different workshops, perhaps staffed by craftsmen from the very regions the emperor had conquered, would have been responsible for different parts of the body. One group might have mass-produced the torsos and legs using standardized molds, while another, more specialized group would have been dedicated solely to the heads and faces. But here's where the process gets fascinating. The heads themselves weren't entirely hand-sculpted from scratch. Evidence suggests they were created using a basic modular system. Artisans likely started with a small number of fundamental head molds, perhaps 8 or 10 basic shapes representing different head structures and face shapes. This gave them the general form. The true magic, the individuality, was added by hand in the clay before it was fired. Using simple tools, they would have added or subtracted clay to create unique facial features. A pinched bit of clay here for a sharper nose, a smoothed application there for fuller lips, delicate incisions to create the subtle lines around eyes that suggest age or laughter, or a carefully rolled piece of clay to form a distinctive furrowed brow. The ears, interestingly, were often made separately and attached, allowing for even more variation. Finally, the application of the individualized paint, most of which has tragically flaked away over the centuries, would have been the final step in bringing these distinct personalities to life. This incredible variety forces us to confront a deeply compelling and haunting possibility. Were these simply imaginative creations, products of an artisan's skill in making each one different? Or do we have something far more intimate and startling here? Could the Terracotta Army actually be a portrait of the real Qin army? The idea is both mesmerizing and deeply unsettling. It proposes that these clay soldiers are not generic representations of military might, but literal likenesses of the living, breathing men who served the emperor. Each statue would then be a permanent memorial to a specific individual, a man who once walked, fought, and lived under Qin Shi Huang's command. If this is true, the implications are profound. It would transform the entire complex from a symbolic monument into a vast, personalized roster. The emperor wouldn't just be taking an army with him, he would be taking his army, the very men who won his wars and unified China. This would align with the ancient Chinese concept of minqi, or spirit articles, where objects buried with the dead were meant to serve them in the afterlife. But instead of generic spirit servants, the emperor would be accompanied by the precise, identifiable spirits of his most loyal troops, ensuring their continued service was personal and absolute. The level of detailed observation required for such a project is mind-boggling. It would have meant artists working from life, perhaps sketching soldiers in the camp or having them sit for brief portraits, capturing the unique set of a jaw, the shape of an eyebrow, the slight crook of a nose that had been broken in battle. This theory, however, is not without its own set of mysteries and problems. Creating such a vast number of individualized portraits would have been an even more monumental task, requiring an immense amount of time and direct access to the soldiers. Given that historical records suggest a relatively short and frantic construction period for the army, primarily at the end of the emperor's life, the practical challenges seem immense. Furthermore, if they are true portraits, it raises a strangely democratic and personal note in a project otherwise defined by impersonal, absolute power. It suggests a value placed on the individual soldier that seems at odds with the Qin state's known reputation for ruthless efficiency and the treatment of conscripts as expendable resources. Perhaps it was the ultimate honor for a soldier to be chosen for this eternal duty. Or perhaps it was the ultimate act of control, capturing not just a man's service in life, but seizing his very likeness for eternity. Whether they are portraits or incredibly inventive works of art, the faces of the Terracotta Army remain one of its most powerful and intimate mysteries, a direct, silent challenge across the centuries from the individual artisans and perhaps the individual soldiers who built an empire. Moving from the faces to the figures themselves, we uncover another layer of this mystery that speaks not to artistry, but to industry. The logistical brilliance behind the army's construction is in many ways as impressive as the soldiers themselves. We're not looking at the work of a single pottery studio, but at the output of a vast, state-controlled industrial complex, a manufacturing operation on a scale the ancient world had never seen before. This was the Terracotta Army production facility, and its methods were centuries ahead of their time. Let's break down how they were made, because the process reveals an almost modern genius for efficiency. The key innovation was the move away from sculpting each soldier as a single, solid piece of clay. Anyone who has worked with clay knows that a life-sized solid figure would be incredibly heavy, nearly impossible to move and almost certain to explode in the kiln from trapped moisture and uneven heating. The Qin artisans solved this with a technique that was both simple and brilliant. They built them like hollow pots. The legs, the torso, and the base were all created separately using coiled clay, a method similar to building a very thick walled vase. This created a sturdy, hollow cylinder for the body, but the real revolution was in their use of modular assembly. This wasn't handcrafted individualism from the ground up. It was a sophisticated system of standardized parts combined with custom detailing. The bodies, for instance, were likely made using a limited set of molds. Evidence suggests there may have been just 7 or 8 basic body types. These standardized torsos provided a reliable, efficient foundation. The arms were also made separately and then attached. This assembly line approach meant that different workshops could specialize in different components, mass-producing legs, torsos, and arms that would all be compatible in the final assembly. It's a concept we associate with automobile factories, not ancient pottery workshops. The heads, as we discussed, followed a similar principle of modular efficiency. They started with a basic molded form and were then individualized by hand. But even the armor and uniforms tell a story of systematic production. The armor plates on the officers, for example, are depicted with incredible realism, showing intricate lacing and precise overlaps. This detail wasn't achieved through free-hand sculpting every single time. Artisans likely used stamped tools to imprint the patterns of the scales and the lacing onto the clay, ensuring consistency and speed across thousands of figures. This combination of mass production and custom hand finishing allowed them to achieve both incredible scale and stunning individuality simultaneously. Perhaps the most daunting technical challenge was the firing process. We are talking about firing thousands of life-sized, complex clay figures, each weighing several hundred pounds. This was a feat of ceramic engineering that still inspires awe today. The kilns required would have been massive, and the risk of failure was enormous. A single flaw in the temperature control or the drying process could cause a figure to crack, warp, or even shatter, wasting weeks of work. The Qin kiln masters had to perfectly manage the drying time for the clay to prevent cracks, then fire them at a consistent temperature, likely around 950 to 1050 degrees Celsius for days on end. The fuel requirements alone were staggering, requiring entire forests to be harvested to feed the fires. The success rate speaks to their astounding skill. While we find broken figures in the pits, often from the roof collapsing long after burial, the vast majority of the warriors emerged from their kilns over 2,000 years ago perfectly fired and intact. This points to a level of quality control and technical knowledge that was unprecedented. This wasn't a hopeful, experimental process. It was a mastered, repeatable technology operated by teams of specialists who knew exactly what they were doing. The entire operation, from clay quarrying to mixing, from molding to assembly, from drying to firing, had to be perfectly coordinated on an industrial scale. It was a logistical ballet directed by the Qin state, demonstrating a command over men, materials, and technology that feels eerily modern, a whisper of industrialization in the ancient world. All of these theories about the army's purpose, whether spiritual, bureaucratic, or psychological, lead us to a single, tantalizing point of convergence. The ultimate answer to this 2,000-year-old mystery likely lies not with the soldiers we can see, but with the one thing we haven't seen, the emperor himself sealed inside the main tomb mound. This massive, four-sided pyramid of earth, untouched and unexcavated, stands as the silent, enigmatic heart of the entire complex. It is the final piece of the puzzle, and what historical records suggest lies within is so extraordinary that it could validate one of our theories, completely rewrite them all, or reveal a purpose for this place beyond our current imagination. The primary source for these incredible claims is Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian, written about a century after the emperor's death. his description moves from the awe-inspiring to the almost science-fictional. He writes that the burial chamber itself replicates the emperor's entire kingdom. The ceiling is inlaid with pearls to represent the stars and constellations of the night sky. Below, a model of the empire's geography unfolds with its rivers and oceans ingeniously engineered not with water but with flowing mercury. This mercury was mechanically circulated, mimicking the eternal ebb and flow of the tides. This isn't just a tomb, it's a microcosm of the universe, a perfect, self-contained model of everything the emperor ruled. The mention of Mercury is particularly compelling because it moves us from legend into the realm of verifiable science. In the 1980s, Chinese archaeologists conducted extensive soil samples on and around the tomb mound. The results were stunning. They found significantly higher concentrations of mercury in the soil over the mound than in the surrounding area, in some places up to 10 times the normal background level. This provides startling scientific corroboration for Sima Qian's 2,000-year-old account. There really does appear to be a large quantity of mercury buried deep beneath that earth. This confirmation transforms the historical text from a possible fable into a credible guidebook, forcing us to take its other, even more fantastical claims seriously. Among those claims are the infamous booby traps. Sima Qian wrote that crossbows were set up inside the tomb passageways, rigged to automatically fire at anyone who dared to intrude. The purpose was to prevent robbery and violation. For a long time, this was dismissed as melodramatic embellishment. How could a mechanical trap remain functional for centuries? But with the mercury rivers now looking more like fact than fiction, we have to reconsider. The Qin were master engineers and metallurgists, as evidenced by the sophisticated bronze weaponry of the Terracotta Army, which still had sharp, chrome-plated edges when unearthed. The concept of mechanical triggers and tension-based weapons was well within their capability. The idea that they could devise a system of pitfalls or spring-loaded mechanisms to protect their emperor's eternal rest is not as far-fetched as it once seemed. So, what could the excavation of this mound ultimately reveal? The presence of the mercury rivers would be a world-shaking discovery. It would irrefutably prove that the emperor's obsession with alchemy and immortality was not just a sidebar to this story, but its central theme. The entire necropolis, with the Terracotta Army as its most visible component, would then be understood as one gigantic alchemical engine. The mercury, the sacred quicksilver of the Taoist elixir, would be flowing through the heart of the machine, with the silent, perfected clay soldiers acting as its guardians and conduits. This would powerfully support the theory that the army's true purpose was metaphysical, to assist in the emperor's transformation and eternal rule over a cosmic, rather than earthly, domain. Finding evidence of the booby traps, perhaps rusted mechanisms or arranged stones that once guided projectiles, would tell a different but equally profound story. It would speak to a very tangible, practical fear. It would suggest that the greatest threat the emperor envisioned was not from supernatural spirits, but from very real, grave-robbing humans. This would pull the narrative back toward the psychological warfare theory. The message of the traps would be clear. The power and secrets of the Qin state are so valuable, so dangerous, that they must be protected forever, even at the cost of any future explorer's life. The tomb becomes not just a sacred space, but a fortified vault. But the most earth-shattering discovery of all would be the emperor himself. What state would his remains be in? The mercury, while symbolically potent, is also highly toxic. Its vapors would have permeated the chamber for millennia, potentially preserving his body in a way no one anticipated or, conversely, complicating any attempt to study it. Could his burial suit be inlaid with jade, as later Han Dynasty emperors were, to assist in immortality? Might we find him surrounded by the lost wisdom texts he famously burned, or by maps to lands unknown? The contents of that chamber are the final context for everything outside of it. The army's formation, their weapons, their very existence, all of it waits for the day the mound is opened, when the emperor's final command can at last be understood. To truly grasp the ambition behind the Terracotta Army, we must first step back into the world as it was in the 3rd century before the Common Era. China was not a single, unified nation, but a collection of 7 major states locked in a brutal, centuries-long struggle known as the Warring States period. This was an age of constant warfare, shifting alliances, and immense suffering, a seemingly endless cycle of conflict that defined life for millions. Into this fractured world emerged the ruler of the Qin state, a man who would not only break the cycle but shatter it entirely, forging a single empire from 7 warring pieces. His name was Ying Zheng, and he would become Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. The sheer scale of his military conquests provides the essential context for the Terracotta Army, because it was this unprecedented mobilization of men and material that made such a colossal project even conceivable. The unification campaign was a masterclass in military logistics and ruthless efficiency. The Qin state, once considered a semi-barbaric frontier kingdom on the western edges of Chinese civilization, had undergone a series of internal reforms that transformed it into a terrifying war machine. Its philosophy was legalism, a system that prized strict, impersonal laws, harsh punishments, and absolute state power above all else. This created a society entirely geared for war. Every citizen had a role to play, and the army was the pinnacle of this organized effort. Qin Shi Huang did not merely command an army, he commanded the entire apparatus of the state, all focused on a single, devastating objective. One by one, the rival states fell. The powerful Chu to the south was subjugated. The sophisticated and cultured Kai to the east was conquered. The ancient homeland of the Zhou dynasty, the state of Han, was absorbed. It was a blitzkrieg of the ancient world, a decade of relentless campaigning that culminated in 221 BC with the final victory and the declaration of a new, unified empire. The resources that this victory brought under the emperor's direct control were almost beyond comprehension. For the first time in history, the entire human and material wealth of China, from the fertile rice paddies of the south to the horse pastures of the north, from the bronze mines of Sichuan to the countless artisans of the eastern coast, was consolidated under a single authority. The treasury was overflowing with the seized wealth of 6 conquered royal families. The population, though weary from war, represented a massive reservoir of labor. Most importantly, the emperor now commanded the loyalty, or at least the forced compliance, of every single general, engineer, architect, and craftsman across the land. He had quite literally an entire nation at his disposal. This is the critical backdrop for the Terracotta Army. No other ruler in Chinese history, before or arguably since, ever wielded such concentrated power to enact a personal vision. The project did not arise from a vacuum. It was the direct and logical extension of a mindset that had just successfully mobilized an entire civilization for war. Having unified the world of the living, it was a natural progression for such a man to now set his sights on organizing the realm of the dead. The psychological impact of this sudden unification cannot be overstated, both for the emperor and for his subjects. For Qin Shi Huang, his victory must have felt nothing short of cosmic. He had achieved what was once thought impossible. He had ended centuries of chaos and imposed his order upon the known universe. This success would have profoundly shaped his vision for the afterlife. A man who conquered the world would not expect to become a meek supplicant in the next life. He would arrive expecting to rule, to administer, to continue his project on a grander, eternal scale. The Terracotta Army, in this light, feels less like a sudden burst of extravagant vanity and more like the next inevitable item on his imperial agenda. It was the necessary military wing for his eternal bureaucracy. Furthermore, the constant threats on his life during his reign, the fear of assassination from loyalists of the old states, would have deeply informed his perception of threat. His fear of death was not abstract, it was born from a lifetime of very real danger. This translates directly into the army's design, an eternal force needed to quell eternal unrest, both spiritual and political. For the conquered people, the construction of the mausoleum served a dual, brutal purpose. Firstly, it was a staggering display of power meant to crush any lingering thoughts of rebellion. The project employed hundreds of thousands of laborers from every corner of the new empire. Imagine the message this sent. The same state that could draft you into an army to conquer your neighbors could now draft you to build a monument to that conquest. It demonstrated that the emperor's power extended even over your death, commanding you to prepare his eternal resting place. Secondly, it was a powerful tool of forced integration. Artisans from the recently defeated states of Chu, Yan, and Kai were brought together under Qin overseers. Their distinct artistic styles and techniques funneled into a single, state-sanctioned project. The Terracotta Army itself, with its mix of facial features reflecting the diverse empire, is a physical manifestation of this forced unity. They were building the very symbol of their own subjugation, a permanent army that would forever cement Qin dominance even in the spiritual world. The scale of the army was not just a product of available resources, it was a deliberate psychological weapon, a final, overwhelming victory monument designed to echo through the centuries. To understand just how radical the Terracotta Army was, we need to look at what came before it. For centuries, the burial customs of China's elite followed a clear, though grim, evolutionary path. In the Shang and early Zhou dynasties, the nobility practiced something called zunzang, or Chinese letter, the sacrificial burial of living beings. This wasn't just about taking your favorite possessions with you, it was about taking the people who served you. When a king or a high-ranking lord died, his concubines, servants, guards, and even charioteers would be put to death and interred with him. The belief was starkly literal. These people would continue their service in the next world. Archaeological excavations of Shang tombs reveal hundreds of skeletons arranged in orderly rows, a ghostly court forever bound to their master. This practice was the ultimate expression of power, demonstrating a ruler's absolute authority, even over life and death itself. Over time, as philosophical thought evolved with Confucianism and Taoism, this brutal practice began to be seen as excessive and cruel. A shift occurred, moving from the sacrifice of actual people to the use of symbolic substitutes. This is where we see the emergence of minqi, or spirit articles. These were objects specifically created for burial, not for use in daily life. They were model representations, small clay figurines of servants, musicians, and guards, or miniature bronze models of chariots and buildings. The idea was that through ritual and symbolism, these inanimate objects could be animated in the spirit world to serve the deceased. This was a more humane and economical approach, but the scale was still intimate, designed for a personal retinue. A nobleman might be buried with a few dozen, or at most a few hundred of these small figurines to attend to his needs. The scale was personal, not imperial. Now place the Terracotta Army into this tradition. On one hand, Emperor Qin Shi Huang was absolutely following the ancient principle of minqi. His warriors are technically spirit articles. They are not real soldiers, they are clay substitutes continuing the trend away from human sacrifice. In that sense, he was operating within a long-standing cultural continuum. But to call this a simple continuation is to miss the point completely. What he did was take the concept of minqi and detonate it with the power of an entire empire. He didn't just scale it up, he transformed it into something categorically different. Instead of a few dozen small figurines, he created a life-sized, full-scale military force numbering in the thousands. He didn't just want servants, he wanted an entire military command structure, complete with generals, officers, and enlisted men. he moved from a model of personal service to a model of eternal imperial governance. This is the crucial rupture in tradition. Previous rulers were buried with what they needed for their personal comfort and status in the afterlife. Qin Shi Huang was buried with what he needed to rule. The earlier figurines represented a household. The Terracotta Army represents a state. This monumental leap in scale and ambition demands an explanation. It wasn't enough for him to have guards, he needed a garrison. It wasn't enough to have chariots, he needed an entire cavalry division. This shift reveals a mind that saw death not as an end to his rule, but as a relocation of his capital. He wasn't preparing for a retirement in the afterlife, he was preparing for a continuation of his administration, and for that he required the full apparatus of power, starting with its military might. The Terracotta Army stands as the ultimate expression of this belief, a tradition shattered and remade on an unimaginable scale to fit the world-altering ambition of China's first emperor. But the emperor's vision for his eternal reign extended far beyond the infantry and cavalry standing in those pits. To understand the full scope of his ambition, we must turn our attention to two of the most breathtaking artifacts ever unearthed from the ancient world: the pair of exquisite bronze chariots discovered in a wooden crate just west of the main tomb mound in 1980. These are not mere models or symbolic trinkets. They are half-scale, fully functional masterpieces of metallurgy, each consisting of over 3,000 separate components and assembled with a precision that would challenge modern engineers. They were found shattered into thousands of pieces, a devastating result of the wooden chamber's collapse, but after a painstaking 8-year restoration project, they emerged as a window into a mind that thought in terms of perfect, eternal systems. The first chariot, known as Number 1, is the high chariot or the lead chariot. It is an open-air, standing vehicle designed for command and inspection. It's outfitted with a magnificent bronze canopy that resembles a tortoise shell, an ancient symbol of immortality, and it's armed with a crossbow and a shield, suggesting its role was to clear a path and provide protection. The second, Number 2, is the security chariot or the comfort chariot. This one is enclosed with windows on all sides and a front opening door, its roof crafted to represent the roof of a permanent palace, complete with rolling eaves. Inside, there are silks and other luxurious fittings, clearly meant for seated, comfortable travel. Together, they form a complete imperial motorcade for the afterlife, one for announcing his presence and ensuring safe passage, the other for his dignified and comfortable transport through the spirit world. The craftsmanship is nothing short of miraculous. Every component is cast in bronze and then finished with an array of precious materials. The chariots are pulled by teams of 4 horses each, their muscles taut and their expressions alert, captured in mid-stride. The reins are made from solid gold and silver wires twisted together. The wheels are fully functional with 30 spokes each and hubs that are engineered to reduce friction. The driver of the high chariot stands proudly, his hand resting on a sword at his waist, his expression one of focused authority. But perhaps the most astonishing detail is the umbrella in the lead chariot. This was not a fixed prop, it was a sophisticated piece of engineering. Its bronze stem is hollow, allowing it to act as a sleeve that could be adjusted for height and angle, and it was even designed to be removed from its base and carried as a hand-held sunshade. This level of practical, multifunctional design speaks to an intention for actual use, not just static display. What do these incredible vehicles tell us about the project's purpose? They shatter the notion that the terracotta complex was solely a military installation. An army fights and garrisons, it does not travel in imperial comfort. The presence of these chariots reveals a narrative of journey and procession. They suggest that the emperor's plan for the afterlife involved movement. He wouldn't be static in his burial chamber. He would be mobile, touring his underworld domain, inspecting his spiritual territories, and being transported in the same state of grandeur that he enjoyed in life. This transforms the entire necropolis from a defensive fortress into the capital city of a new, eternal kingdom, complete with all the infrastructure needed for a peripatetic ruler. The materials used are a declaration in themselves. While the terracotta warriors are made from the common earth of the realm, symbolizing the human resources of the empire, the chariots are crafted from its most precious metals: bronze, gold, and silver. This isn't just a difference in value, it's a difference in essence. The warriors represent the manpower, the sheer volume of control. The chariots represent the pinnacle of technology, art, and concentrated wealth. They are the crown jewels of the operation, the most refined and perfect objects the Qin state could produce. Their half-scale size is also profoundly significant. They are not toys, they are perfect, scaled-down replicas. In many spiritual traditions, a perfect miniature contains the entire essence of the full-sized object. By creating a perfect, functional half-scale model, the artisans were capturing the complete spiritual reality of an imperial chariot, making it a suitable vessel for the emperor's soul to utilize in its travels. These chariots are the ultimate expression of a project that was never about mere representation, but about the creation of a functional, operable reality in the world beyond. Buried alongside these silent soldiers, another mystery lay waiting in the dark earth for over 2 millennia. The terracotta figures are awe-inspiring, but it was the discovery of their weaponry that truly sent shockwaves through the archaeological world. When the first pit was excavated, researchers found thousands of bronze weapons scattered among the figures: swords, spears, dagger axes, and crossbow triggers. These weren't crude ceremonial props or symbolic tokens, they were the real deal. The blades were sharp, the points were lethal, and the craftsmanship was staggering. Many of the swords, for instance, were found to still have a sharp, polished edge, capable of inflicting a serious wound even after 2,200 years underground. This incredible state of preservation wasn't just good luck, it was a testament to advanced technology. Analysis revealed the bronze was alloyed with just the right amount of tin to achieve a perfect balance of hardness and flexibility. And most astonishingly, many of the weapons were found to have been treated with a form of chromium oxide, a complex anti-corrosion technique that was thought to be a 20th century invention. This was a combat-ready arsenal frozen in time. This finding initially seemed to be the final, definitive proof for the traditional funerary guard theory. Why equip your clay army with real, lethally sharp weapons if they weren't intended for actual use in the spiritual realm? It suggested a very literal belief that the battles of the afterlife would be fought with physical arms, and that these terracotta soldiers would need the proper tools for the job. The weapons were positioned with clear tactical intention. Crossbowmen were found with bundles of bronze bolts beside them. Infantrymen held spears or dagger axes. Officers wore swords at their hips. The distribution wasn't random. It mirrored the precise equipment a real Qin army would have carried into a campaign. This level of practical detail makes it incredibly difficult to dismiss the entire project as purely symbolic. The emperor, it seemed, was taking no chances. Yet, as with everything in this complex, the reality is layered with fascinating contradictions. While the weapons themselves are undoubtedly real and functional, the way they were deployed among the army tells a slightly different story. For one, not every soldier is holding a weapon. In fact, a significant number of the figures have their hands positioned as if they were once gripping something, but that something is missing. This has led to a long-standing debate. Were all the soldiers originally armed, with many of the weapons looted in the aftermath of the empire's collapse? Or were only a certain percentage ever given real weapons, perhaps to signify a special status or unit? The evidence points toward widespread looting in antiquity, which certainly accounts for some of the emptiness, but it doesn't fully resolve the question. The most compelling argument for a symbolic purpose lies in the construction of the soldiers themselves. Their hands are sculpted in a fixed, often open-handed pose. They cannot grip, they cannot swing, they cannot thrust. Their arms are solid clay fused to their bodies. A terracotta infantryman is forever frozen in his stance, incapable of the complex, fluid motions of combat. He can hold a spear upright, but he cannot lunge with it. He can have a sword scabbarded at his side, but he cannot draw it. This creates a profound disconnect between the capability of the weapon and the capability of the warrior holding it. The weapon is dynamic and functional. The soldier is static and immobile. This isn't a problem if the weapons themselves are the point. It suggests that the power resided not in the soldier's ability to use the weapon, but in the weapon's own inherent spiritual potency as an object of war. This brings us to a powerful alternative interpretation. Perhaps these real weapons were not meant to be used by the terracotta soldiers at all. Instead, they might have been consecrated objects, imbued with the spirit of warfare through their very realness, and then bestowed upon the clay army as a form of ritual empowerment. In this view, the army is a massive collection of individual vessels, and the weapons are the catalysts that activate them. A real, sharpened bronze sword placed in the hand of a clay figure isn't a tool for that figure. It's the ingredient that transforms the figure from a sculpture into a spiritual guardian. The weapon's history, forged in a Qin arsenal, perhaps even carried by a real soldier, would contribute to its power, making it a perfect conductor for the martial energy the emperor wanted to channel. So, were they real weapons or ceremonial ones? The answer appears to be both. They were utterly real in their construction and lethality, but their purpose was likely ceremonial and metaphysical. They served as the critical, tangible link between the abstract idea of an eternal army and its intended spiritual function. The emperor wasn't just burying an army, he was burying the very essence of military power. The sharp, chrome-plated edge of a sword wasn't for cutting down spiritual enemies in a physical fight. It was a razor-sharp symbol of the emperor's unstoppable will, an object so perfectly crafted for violence that its mere presence could demarcate and defend his sacred space for eternity. The weapons guarantee that the army's threat is eternal and absolute, even if its soldiers never move a single inch. But who were the hands that shaped this ambition? The creation of the Terracotta Army was arguably one of the most colossal labor projects of the ancient world, an endeavor that required the mobilization of an entire society. For decades, the prevailing image has been one of brutal coercion, of endless lines of conscripted laborers, toiling under the whip of a ruthless regime to fulfill the megalomaniacal fantasy of a tyrant. This view is not without foundation. The Qin state was built on legalism, a philosophy that prized absolute state control and harsh punishment above all else. Historical records describe the use of convicts and conscripts for massive public works projects, and the sheer scale of the mausoleum, estimated to have employed over 700,000 people at its peak, suggests a system of forced labor on an almost unimaginable scale. It is easy to picture a scene of grim suffering, with workers driven to exhaustion and death to meet impossible quotas, their lives considered utterly expendable by the state apparatus. Yet, when we look closer at the archaeological evidence from the site itself, this picture of unrelenting misery begins to develop fascinating cracks. The discovery of the workers' tombs near the mausoleum complex reveals a much more complex story. These tombs are not mass graves for discarded laborers, but individual burials with a surprising level of care. Many contained personal seals, small grave goods, and tools of their trade. Even more telling are the inscriptions found on the terracotta warriors themselves and on bricks and tiles used in the construction. These markings often include the name of the craftsman's home workshop or the specific area he came from, phrases like "from the capital" or "from Yueyang." This practice of signing one's work is not the act of a broken, anonymous slave. It is the act of a craftsman, someone who took pride in their contribution and wanted their individual effort to be recognized even within the vastness of the project. This evidence points toward a system that was far more sophisticated than simple brute force. It suggests that the labor force was highly organized, likely structured around a core of skilled master artisans and supervisors from the Qin heartland, who then directed larger teams of semi-skilled and unskilled laborers drawn from across the newly unified empire. These laborers may have been conscripts fulfilling their annual corvée duty, a tax paid in labor that was a common practice in ancient China, but their work was managed with a precision that valued skill and accountability. The presence of these signatures implies a system of quality control where work could be traced back to its source, encouraging pride and precision rather than just punishing failure. This leads us to the profound and haunting question at the heart of this mystery. Were these individuals merely forced conscripts, or could they have also been believers? To answer that, we must try to step into their worldview. The Qin conquest was fresh, and the concept of a unified Chinese identity was just being forged, often violently. For a potter from the defeated state of Chu or a kiln master from Kai, being forced to work on the tomb of the man who conquered their homeland must have been a bitter experience. For them, the labor was likely pure coercion, a daily reminder of their subjugation. But for others, particularly those from the Qin homeland, the project may have held a deeply different meaning. They were not just building a tomb, they were participating in the most important spiritual and state project of their era. They were ensuring that the emperor who had brought them victory and unprecedented prestige would continue to wield power forever. In a world where the boundary between the physical and the spiritual was porous and real, constructing the emperor's eternal army could have been seen as a sacred, nation-preserving duty. Their meticulous work, their desire to sign their names, could stem from a belief that they were creating something that would functionally exist in the next world, and that their role in its creation would be remembered and perhaps even rewarded by their emperor in the afterlife. The labor force, therefore, was likely a complex mix of the two extremes, the bitterly coerced and the devoutly willing, with most people probably falling somewhere in the middle, simply doing a difficult job that was their duty to the state, finding small ways to take personal pride in a task whose ultimate scale they could scarcely comprehend. Their silent signatures, etched into the clay, are a powerful testament to the individual humanity that persisted even within the engine of imperial ambition. This eastward orientation, which we've considered from tactical and spiritual perspectives, takes on a completely new dimension when viewed through the lens of the stars. What if the entire formation of the Terracotta Army was designed not to face the earthly kingdoms of old, but to mirror the celestial kingdom above? This is the core of the astronomical alignment hypothesis, a theory that suggests the warriors are less of an army and more of a permanent, three-dimensional star chart, an eternal map of the heavens frozen in the earth. Proponents of this idea point to the deep and abiding connection between power and the cosmos in ancient Chinese thought. The emperor's legitimacy didn't just come from military victory, it was divinely mandated by what was known as the mandate of heaven. His role was that of the supreme intermediary between the earthly realm and the celestial one. To rule effectively, he had to align his actions with the rhythms of the universe, the movements of the sun, moon, planets, and stars. Astrology and astronomy were not separate disciplines. They were two sides of the same coin, used to dictate the timing of everything from agricultural planting to major military campaigns. Given this context, it seems almost unthinkable that Qin Shi Huang, a man obsessed with order and cosmic legitimacy, would leave his most important eternal project unconnected to the stars. The layout of the entire mausoleum complex offers some compelling, if circumstantial, clues. The main tomb mound itself is often described as a pyramid of earth, a man-made mountain reaching toward the sky. Sima Qian's account of the burial chamber describes a ceiling inlaid with pearls to represent the constellations, with mercury rivers flowing below, creating a perfect microcosm of the universe. If the emperor's burial chamber was designed to be a model of the cosmos, then it follows that the army stationed outside of it might also be part of that grand cosmic scheme. They wouldn't just be guarding the tomb, they would be representing a part of the celestial order, focusing specifically on the army pits. The arrangement of the different military branches starts to look less like a battle plan and more like a symbolic representation of celestial bodies. The massive, orderly rows of infantry in Pit 1 could be seen as the fixed background stars of the Milky Way, a dense river of figures representing the constant, unchanging fabric of the night sky. Pit 2, with its more diverse and mobile units, the cavalry, the chariots, the archers positioned in their dynamic formations, might then correspond to the planets. In ancient astronomy, the planets were called wandering stars because they moved differently against the backdrop of the fixed constellations. This would make the cavalry and chariots a perfect symbolic match for these celestial wanderers. Finally, the High Command in Pit 3, with its elite officers and a single chariot, could be interpreted as representing the pole star or a crucial central constellation, the command center of the heavens around which everything else revolves. The most specific and controversial claim within this theory involves the constellation known as Dipper, or in modern terms, the Big Dipper, which was of paramount importance in ancient Chinese cosmology. This asterism within the larger Ursa Major constellation was more than just a navigational tool. It was seen as the celestial chariot of the supreme deity, and its movement through the seasons was used to dictate the imperial calendar. Some researchers have overlaid the pattern of the Big Dipper onto the layout of the Terracotta Army pits and the tomb mound, suggesting a potential correlation. The handle of the Dipper might align with the positioning of the chariots and cavalry, while the cup points toward the tomb, symbolically linking the Emperor's eternal rest with the very heart of celestial power. While this precise geometric mapping is hotly debated and difficult to prove, the symbolic intention is powerful. It positions the Emperor not just as a passive observer of the heavens, but as the central axis around which the cosmos itself turns. If this theory holds any weight, it fundamentally changes the army's purpose. They were not stationed to wage war, but to perform a perpetual, silent ritual. Their formation would act as a permanent astrological anchor, ensuring the Emperor's spirit remained in harmony with the cosmic order for all eternity. This would be the ultimate expression of his power, a project so vast that it didn't just imitate the cosmos, but actively sought to tap into its eternal rhythms, guaranteeing his mandate would never expire, not even in death. While the cosmic and bureaucratic theories paint a picture of a ruler projecting power outward, another deeply human interpretation looks inward into the mind of the Emperor himself. This is not a story of spiritual conquest or statecraft, but one of profound personal obsession and psychological need. To see the Terracotta Army through this lens, we must view it not as a tool for the afterlife, but as the ultimate manifestation of Qin Shi Huang's own fears, desires, and perhaps his deepest insecurities. This theory suggests the army was his dream army, a perfect, silent, and utterly loyal force created to compensate for the messy, unreliable realities of his actual rule and his own terrifying mortality. Consider the nature of the real army that won him his empire. It was a formidable machine, yes, but it was also comprised of human beings, conscripts from conquered states with questionable loyalty, ambitious generals who might crave power for themselves, and weary soldiers who could desert or mutiny. The Emperor lived in constant fear of assassination, and historical records are filled with his efforts to root out conspiracies. His own mortality was a shadow that followed him every day. The Terracotta Army, by contrast, is the perfect, unthinking instrument of his will. These soldiers cannot betray him. They cannot grow old, become disabled, or question his orders. They are frozen in a state of perfect, unwavering loyalty and readiness. This isn't just a military force, it's a psychological salve, a creation that allowed the Emperor to envision a world where his control was absolute and unchallenged, even by the very nature of his own human agents. The incredible individuality of each warrior's face, rather than contradicting this, actually strengthens it. This wasn't a generic, faceless horde. It was a meticulously crafted collection of idealized individuals. Each unique face could represent the emperor's desire to symbolically capture and control the diverse peoples of his empire, not as rebellious subjects but as perfect, compliant servants. He couldn't control the hearts and minds of every living person in China, but he could command the artisans to create a world where he did. In this sense, the army is less a practical guard and more the world's most elaborate and expensive piece of wish fulfillment, a physical representation of the total control that perpetually eluded him in the chaotic real world. His notorious quest for a literal elixir of immortality reveals a mind desperate to deny the inevitable. When those efforts repeatedly failed, the creation of this eternal clay army may have served as a symbolic alternative. If he could not make his physical body immortal, he could ensure that his power, his authority, and his most perfect self-image would endure forever, literally set in stone or rather in fired clay. The warriors are not just soldiers, they are a monument to his own ego, a defiant statement against the decay and uncertainty that ultimately claimed him. They stand as a silent, permanent rebuttal to death itself, a declaration that while his flesh might fail, the essence of his power, perfectly ordered and perfectly obedient, would never dissipate. This army was the emperor's ultimate act of compensation, building in the physical world the absolute security and permanence he could never achieve in his own life. Yet another layer to this mystery emerges when we look far beyond China's borders to the distant shores of the Mediterranean. In the centuries before the Qin dynasty, the armies of Alexander the Great had marched all the way to the edges of the Indian subcontinent, spreading Hellenistic culture and artistic techniques across a vast expanse of the known world. This period of unprecedented cross-continental contact has led some scholars to propose a radical idea. Could the startling realism of the terracotta warriors have been inspired by Greek sculpture? The notion is both electrifying and highly controversial, suggesting a thread of cultural exchange that would rewrite our understanding of ancient globalization. The core of this argument rests on a dramatic artistic shift. Before the Qin era, Chinese figural sculpture was largely symbolic and abstract. Think of the fascinating but stylized bronze human figures from Sanxingdui, with their exaggerated features and metallic grandeur. They are powerful, but they are not realistic. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, we get the Terracotta Army, thousands of life-sized figures with accurate human proportions, detailed musculature, individualized faces, and realistic postures. This leap toward naturalism is so sudden and so profound that it begs for an explanation. Proponents of the Hellenistic influence theory point out that this shift coincides almost perfectly with the era after Alexander's campaigns, raising the tantalizing possibility that knowledge of Greek sculptural techniques, which excelled in lifelike representation, could have filtered eastward along the budding Silk Road trade routes. The mechanics of such a transfer, while difficult to prove, are not impossible to imagine. We know that indirect trade networks existed, connecting the Hellenistic world with Central Asia and from there into China. It is entirely plausible that small goods, artworks, or even stories describing the giant marble statues of Greek gods and athletes could have traveled these routes. Perhaps even more compelling is the idea of the transmission of knowledge not through goods but through people. Could a lone, itinerant Greek sculptor or an artisan trained in Hellenistic traditions have found employment in the Qin court? Imagine a master craftsman from the West, schooled in the principles of realism, sharing his techniques with local Qin artisans. This kind of knowledge transfer wouldn't require a massive invasion or a formal delegation. It could have been the work of a single, skilled individual whose expertise caught the eye of a project overseer desperate for innovative methods to fulfill the emperor's unprecedented vision. However, this theory faces significant and powerful counterarguments. The most substantial is the stark lack of direct archaeological evidence. No Greek artifacts have been found in the tomb complex, no inscriptions in Hellenistic script, no clear artistic motifs that are undeniably Greek. The realism of the terracotta warriors is also distinctly Chinese. While the figures are lifelike, they do not possess the idealized beauty, the contrapposto stances, or the focus on divine perfection that defines classical Greek statuary. The Qin soldiers are realistic, but they are also utilitarian and grounded. Their realism serves a documentary purpose, capturing the look of a real, diverse army, rather than an artistic one aimed at achieving aesthetic idealism. Furthermore, the technology behind the army, the assembly line production, the use of local clay, the modular construction, is thoroughly and innovatively Chinese, showing a focus on scale and efficiency that was a hallmark of Qin engineering. So, where does this leave us? It seems unlikely that a Greek master sculptor was directing operations in the pits of Xi'an. The Terracotta Army remains a profoundly Chinese achievement, born from the unique logistical genius and imperial will of the Qin state. However, the possibility of indirect influence of a spark of an idea traveling thousands of miles cannot be so easily dismissed. Even if no Greek ever set foot on the project, the mere knowledge that such lifelike art was being created elsewhere in the world could have been enough to ignite the ambition of a ruler who wanted nothing less than the absolute best for his eternal journey. The greatest legacy of this theory may not be in proving a direct link, but in opening our minds to a more connected ancient world where ideas could diffuse and inspire, helping a driven emperor and his countless artisans to envision and project on a scale that the world had never seen before. While the silent ranks of unearthed warriors have offered countless clues, some of the most revolutionary insights into the emperor's ambitions haven't come from a trowel but from technology. For decades, the true scale of the mausoleum complex was anyone's guess, with archaeologists limited to the areas they could physically dig. That all changed with the arrival of advanced ground-penetrating radar and other remote sensing technologies, allowing researchers to literally see through the earth without disturbing a single grain of soil. What these electronic eyes have revealed is a hidden world beneath the surface, a sprawling subterranean city that is far more vast and complex than anyone had ever imagined. The three pits containing the famous infantry and cavalry are just the tip of a colossal iceberg. The radar surveys have confirmed the existence of a staggering 180 accompanying burial pits and underground structures scattered across a site that encompasses nearly 20 square miles. This isn't just a tomb with a few guards, it's a massive recreation of the entire Qin imperial court, frozen in time. The scans show evidence of grand stables containing the skeletons of real horses, complete with elegantly crafted bronze buckets and horse gear, suggesting the terracotta cavalry was backed by a living, breathing stable of imperial steeds. Other pits appear to be vast storehouses, filled with the silent remnants of armor and stone helmets, likely the actual equipment used by the real army, buried as powerful spirit objects alongside their ceramic counterparts. There are pits containing the skeletons of exotic animals, perhaps the emperor's personal menagerie, and even more chillingly, pits holding the remains of concubines and high-ranking officials, a sobering return to the older, brutal tradition of human sacrifice that the terracotta figures were supposed to replace. Perhaps the most electrifying discovery from this non-invasive exploration concerns the main tomb mound itself. The radar and soil analysis have provided startling physical evidence that corroborates the ancient historian Sima Qian's most fantastical claim. The scans have detected unusual, highly regular magnetic anomalies within the mound, and core samples have consistently revealed mercury levels that are significantly higher than the surrounding area. This strongly suggests that the descriptions of flowing mercury rivers and seas inside the burial chamber are not myth, but a terrifying and ingenious reality. The emperor didn't just want a model of his kingdom, he wanted a functioning alchemical landscape with quicksilver. the sacred substance of immortality, eternally circulating through the heart of his tomb. This evidence powerfully shifts the narrative, forcing us to see the entire complex, including the Terracotta Army, not as a passive monument, but as a single, active machine designed for a cosmic purpose. These technological revelations have completely rewritten the project's scale, but they've also deepened the mystery of its purpose. The sheer variety of these underground chambers defies a single explanation. The presence of administrative offices with terracotta scribes suggests a functioning bureaucracy. The palatial structures imply a courtly life. The stables and armories point to military readiness. And the mercury-infused tomb chamber screams of alchemical ritual. The Terracotta Army is no longer an isolated phenomenon. It is the military wing of a complete shadow empire buried in its entirety. This hidden city reveals an ambition that is simultaneously practical and utterly mystical. A plan to take everything, every official, every servant, every soldier, every horse, and every ritual object, and transplant the entire operating system of the Qin state into the next world, ensuring the emperor's control would continue unchallenged for all eternity. For centuries, we've pictured these warriors in the muted, solemn tones of baked clay, a monochrome army marching out of the earth. This aesthetic has deeply shaped our perception of them as a stoic, purely functional military force. But this vision is a complete illusion, a trick of time. The moment these soldiers were completed over 2,000 years ago, they were anything but monochrome. They were a breathtaking explosion of color, each figure meticulously painted with vibrant lacquers and pigments that would put any modern artist to shame. Imagine standing in that pit before the roof collapsed and the colors faded. Instead of a silent, earthen god, you would be surrounded by a brilliant, lifelike army. Their armor was painted in rich blacks, reds, and purples tied with pink and green laces. Their faces were rendered in flesh tones with individually painted features, rosy cheeks, and detailed black hair. Their trousers could be green or blue, their shoes black or red. This was not a solemn procession, it was a vibrant, dazzling display. This revelation completely shatters the straightforward image of a purely functional funerary guard. An army intended for perpetual, practical combat in the spirit world would not need such elaborate and varied cosmetic detailing. The incredible time, resources, and artistic skill poured into this polychrome finish suggests a purpose that went far beyond the utilitarian. The paint wasn't just a coating, it was a language. In ancient China, color was deeply symbolic and strictly codified. The Qin dynasty favored black, associating it with the water element and the power of the northern sky, which is why we see so much black armor. Red was a color of life, energy, and good fortune. The specific combinations of colors on an officer's armor or the intricate patterns on a saddlecloth would have denoted rank, unit, and region of origin with a clarity that everyone in that era would have instantly understood. This transforms the army from a generic force into a meticulously organized, highly detailed representation of a real military structure, where every single soldier's role and origin were visually communicated. The technical process of applying this paint reveals just how crucial it was to the overall design. After the clay figures were fired and cooled, artisans applied a layer of lacquer as a base primer. This lacquer, derived from the sap of lacquer trees, was a difficult and expensive medium to work with, requiring specific humidity conditions to cure properly without wrinkling. This was not a slapdash operation, it was a highly specialized craft. On top of this lacquer base, mineral-based pigments were carefully brushed on. The palette was stunning, cinnabar for vibrant reds, azurite and malachite for blues and greens, charcoal for black, and lead white and barium copper silicate for unique hand purple. The result was a glossy, durable, and incredibly vivid finish. The fact that the Qin state went to such extraordinary lengths, mastering lacquer application on a colossal scale, and sourcing rare pigments from across the empire proves that the painted finish was not an afterthought. It was an integral, non-negotiable part of the army's identity and intended function. So what does this riot of color tell us about their true purpose? The vibrant paint job pushes us strongly toward theories that involve ceremony, display, and ritual. This army looks far more like it's prepared for a grand imperial parade or a sacred ritual than for the grim, dirty business of eternal trench warfare. The paint makes them complete, perfect, and whole. In a ritual or alchemical context, this state of perfected, colorful completion would be essential. A spirit article, or minky, needed to be a perfect representation to function properly in the afterlife. A partially finished, unpainted soldier might be seen as ineffective, a broken tool. The paint, therefore, could have been the final, essential step that activated each figure, transforming it from a lump of clay into a spiritual vessel, ready for its eternal duty. The army in its full polychrome glory would have been a staggering sight, a powerful visual manifestation of the emperor's absolute power, designed to awe any spiritual entity that witnessed it and to properly honor the emperor as he began his journey into the next realm. The loss of this color is one of the great tragedies of archaeology, but its original presence is one of the most important clues, forcing us to see these warriors not as the grim sentinels of popular imagination, but as the vibrant, ceremonial guardians of an emperor's dream. To truly grasp the sheer audacity of the Terracotta Army, we need to leave the Qin dynasty behind for a moment and look at what came after. The Han dynasty, which ruled China for over 4 centuries immediately following the collapse of the Qin, also filled their tombs with spirit figures. But the difference in scale and ambition is so vast, it's like comparing a single pebble to a mountain range. The Han continued the tradition of minky, but they radically scaled down their vision, opting for a more domestic, manageable, and some might argue, more practical vision of the afterlife. Where Qin Shi Huang buried an entire imperial government in microcosm, the Han elites were content with a well-staffed estate. The most common Han burial figures are charming, often delightful pottery models of everyday life. Archaeologists have uncovered miniature pigsties filled with tiny clay pigs, compact watchtowers for the spirit guards, and entire flocks of ducks and chickens to provide sustenance. You find small, simplified figurines of servants milling grain, musicians playing instruments, and dancers frozen mid-twirl. The centerpiece of many a Han tomb was a magnificent pottery model of a multi-story manor house or a fortified tower, a symbol of the family's wealth and status that they could take with them. These objects are beautiful and incredibly informative, giving us a window into Han domesticity, but they operate on a human scale. They are about comfort, sustenance, and maintaining one's social station in the next world. The Terracotta Army, by contrast, is not about comfort, it is about conquest on a cosmic level. This dramatic shift wasn't just a matter of different tastes. It was a profound political and philosophical reaction against the terrifying excesses of the Qin. The Han dynasty founders had witnessed first and how the crushing burdens of Qin projects, the Great Wall, the massive road networks, and of course the Emperor's Mausoleum had drained the treasury, exhausted the population, and sparked the rebellions that tore the empire apart. They deliberately positioned their dynasty as the benevolent opposite of the Qin's brutal legalism, embracing Confucian ideals of moderation, humane governance, and filial piety. Building a replica army of thousands of life-sized soldiers would have been seen as the height of irresponsible tyranny, a direct path back to the chaos they had just escaped. Their scaled-down minky reflected a new ethos. The afterlife should be peaceful, orderly, and manageable, not an eternal extension of imperial expansion. The material difference is staggering. A Han dynasty pottery horse is a lovely object, perhaps 2 or 3 feet tall, sculpted with spirit but clearly a symbolic representation. A Qin dynasty terracotta horse is a life-sized, powerful animal, weighing hundreds of pounds with accurate musculature, detailed tack, and a presence that feels genuinely alive. A Han infantryman might be a foot-tall figure with a generic face and a blob of clay for a weapon. A Qin soldier is a life-sized, individualized portrait of a warrior holding a real, sharpened bronze sword. The Han were creating symbols, the Qin were creating a reality. This distinction highlights the unique, almost unhinged ambition of Qin Shi Huang. He wasn't interested in symbolism alone, he demanded a literal, one-to-one correlation. He didn't want a model of an army, he wanted an army. This commitment to literal reality is what makes his project so isolated in history, a flash of unparalleled megalomania that no subsequent ruler, even with equal resources, dared to replicate. The Terracotta Army stands alone not because the technology was lost, but because the will and the specific, terrifying worldview that fueled it was never repeated. This staggering complexity and priceless value lead us to the greatest dilemma in modern archaeology, the decision to leave the heart of the complex untouched. The unexcavated main tomb mound of Qin Shi Huang is not just an archaeological site. It is a sealed vessel holding 2,200 years of history, and the moment we break that seal, we risk destroying the very secrets we seek to uncover. The greatest challenge isn't funding or willpower. It's the very real possibility that our current technology is simply not equal to the task of preservation. Imagine the scene inside that burial chamber as described by ancient texts. A miniature universe with pearl-inlaid constellations on the ceiling and vast topographical maps of China on the floor, with rivers of mercury flowing through them. Scientific soil analysis has already confirmed abnormally high mercury concentrations within the mound, proving these ancient accounts were more than just legend. This presents an immediate and lethal problem. Mercury is highly toxic, and breaching the chamber could release dangerous vapors that would threaten any excavation team and potentially poison the local environment. But the chemical threat is only the beginning. The real terror for any conservator is the potential for rapid decay. For over 2 millennia, the organic artifacts inside that tomb, the silks, the wooden structures, the lacquerware, perhaps even the emperor's own remains, have existed in a carefully balanced microenvironment. The temperature and humidity levels have remained constant, preserving materials that would be incredibly fragile. The moment archaeologists puncture that seal, they introduce fresh air, modern microbes, and fluctuations in humidity. We've seen this happen before on a smaller scale. When the Terracotta Army was first unearthed, the vibrant, elaborate paint that covered the soldiers, a detail that completely changes our perception of them from a monochrome army to a brilliant, polychrome spectacle, began to curl and flake off within minutes of exposure to the dry Xian air. We permanently lost those colors because we didn't yet understand how to stabilize them. The contents of the main tomb are infinitely more delicate and varied. A silk banner, perfectly preserved in the dark for centuries, could turn to dust before our eyes. A lacquer box inlaid with mother-of-pearl could warp and crack. The irreversible loss would be a catastrophe for history. Beyond the practical challenges lies a profound ethical question for the global community. This isn't just a Chinese treasure, it is a pinnacle of human heritage. Do we have the right to potentially damage this irreplaceable time capsule for the sake of our curiosity? Many argue that we are merely temporary stewards of the past, and our primary duty is to preserve it for future generations who will undoubtedly have far more advanced, non-invasive technologies. The development of muon tomography, a technique that uses cosmic rays to create X-ray-like images of dense structures, offers a glimpse of this future. It might one day allow us to peer into the chambers without ever breaking ground, to map its contents in vivid detail from the surface. Rushing in now with shovels and brushes could be seen as an act of arrogant haste, sacrificing ultimate understanding for immediate gratification. The truth behind the Terracotta Army's purpose may forever remain locked within that mound, not as a failure of science, but as the ultimate act of respect for a wonder we are not yet wise enough to fully unveil. So where does this leave us after exploring these layers of meaning? The evidence overwhelmingly suggests the Terracotta Army was never intended for a single, straightforward purpose. This was not a simple funerary guard, it was a multifaceted masterpiece of imperial ambition. The strategic misplacement of the army, far from the tomb it was supposedly meant to defend, points away from literal protection. The absence of a support corps, the grooms, medics, and supply officers a real army requires tells us this force was never designed for a long campaign. Instead, we find a breathtakingly detailed, vibrantly painted tableau, a symbolic display of power meant to awe both the living and the spiritual realms. It was the military arm of a vast subterranean bureaucracy, a tool for psychological warfare to deter rebellion, and the centerpiece of a colossal alchemical ritual aimed at conquering death itself. Emperor Qin Shi Huang wasn't just building a guard, he was constructing an entire reality, a perfect, eternal extension of his rule into the cosmos. Perhaps the true magic of this place, however, lies not in the answers we've found, but in the questions that remain. The mystery is what fuels our endless fascination. It transforms a collection of clay and bronze from a static archaeological site into a living, breathing enigma. We are drawn back again and again, not because we have solved it, but because we haven. The unseen contents of the central tomb mound promise even greater revelations, holding the potential to confirm our wildest theories or to completely shatter them with something beyond our current imagination. This enduring uncertainty invites us all to become detectives of the deep past, to look at the determined face of a single clay soldier and wonder what grand, impossible dream he was created to serve. What do you believe was the true purpose of the Terracotta Army? Was it primarily a spiritual conqueror, an alchemical engine, or the ultimate symbol of power? The conversation doesn't end here. Share your own theories and thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue unraveling history's greatest archaeological enigma together.